That dawn, nobody knew the ammunition was designed to kill Union soldiers. July 2nd, 1863. The fog rolled across the Pennsylvania countryside like smoke from 1,000 battles, concealing everything except the coordinates, scrawled on orders that bore no official seal. 7 soldiers from the 20th Maine Volunteer Infantry Regiment, handpicked from Joshua Chamberlain's command, carrying Springfield rifles that felt lighter than they should, and orders that came from someone who wasn't listed in any Army of the Potomac roster, moving toward Gettysburg along routes that appeared on no military maps. The mission briefing had lasted exactly 9 minutes. Investigate reports of Confederate ammunition supplies hidden near Union lines. Secure enemy ordnance for analysis. Prevent sabotage of Union artillery positions. Standard reconnaissance operations for the largest battle of the Civil War. Except nothing about this mission was standard, starting with the fact that their target coordinates were in territory that Union forces controlled, not Confederate positions they were supposed to be fighting. Sergeant First Class Samuel Morrison checked his compass and studied the terrain ahead. Irish immigrant from Boston, who had joined the Union Army to preserve the Republic and end slavery, expert in reconnaissance and skirmishing from 2 years fighting Confederate forces across Virginia and Maryland, had volunteered for this assignment because he believed the intelligence reports about enemy sabotage operations, because he trusted his officers to provide accurate information about Confederate activities, because he thought secret missions were secret to protect Union operational security, not to hide activities that would shame people who had never shouldered muskets or faced Confederate fire. Corporal Thomas Anderson carried the signal equipment that had been modified with telegraph codes he couldn't decipher. German immigrant from Pennsylvania, who spoke fluent German and understood military engineering, had enlisted to fight for American democracy after witnessing European tyranny, wanted to preserve the Union and prove that democratic government could survive civil war, had no idea that preserving democracy sometimes required activities that were indistinguishable from the tyranny he had fled, that fighting for freedom sometimes meant becoming indistinguishable from those who would destroy it. The facility appeared through morning mist, like something that didn't belong on a Civil War battlefield, not the crude Confederate supply depots that characterized most enemy logistics operations. This was sophisticated industrial infrastructure, modern manufacturing facilities designed for large-scale production, railroad sidings that connected to Northern transportation networks rather than Confederate supply lines. And most disturbing of all, smokestacks that were producing ammunition components, despite reports that claimed all Confederate manufacturing in Pennsylvania had been eliminated by Union advances. Private First Class Michael O'Brien raised his field glasses and studied the complex. Farm boy from Maine, who had grown up around machinery and understood industrial operations. Expert marksman, who could identify military equipment from civilian manufacturing. Natural scout, who could distinguish enemy positions from friendly installations. But nothing in his training had prepared him for what he was seeing through those field glasses. Buildings that were clearly designed for weapons manufacturing and artillery production. Machinery that belonged in Northern armories, not Confederate facilities, and workers moving between buildings who weren't wearing Confederate uniforms, weren't wearing Union uniforms, were wearing civilian clothes that looked distinctly Northern. Sergeant William Davis carried the explosives that were supposed to destroy Confederate ammunition stockpiles. Former coal miner from Pennsylvania, who understood explosives and industrial sabotage, had lost relatives in mining accidents caused by unsafe conditions, volunteered for dangerous missions because he believed eliminating Confederate supplies would shorten the war and save Union lives, because he trusted that Union forces were fighting for justice and preservation of the Republic, because he thought the explosives he carried would be used to eliminate weapons that threatened Union soldiers, not to destroy evidence of activities that Union officials couldn't afford to acknowledge. The manufacturing complex was operational, not abandoned by retreating Confederates, not captured by advancing Union forces, not destroyed by artillery bombardment that intelligence claimed had eliminated all enemy capabilities in the region. Operational and apparently producing ammunition and artillery components that required sophisticated equipment, trained personnel, and ongoing logistical support. Activities that someone was willing to risk 7 Union lives to investigate or eliminate or cover up. Private James Murphy was the medic, Irish-American from New York, whose father had told him stories about wars that made grown men weep with horror, had joined the Union Army to prevent the Republic from being destroyed by rebellion and slavery, to protect Union soldiers from wounds and diseases that could kill thousands during extended campaigns, had no idea that protecting Union lives sometimes required sacrificing them to maintain plausible deniability about activities that couldn't be officially sanctioned. Corporal Robert Johnson handled communications and intelligence gathering, former schoolteacher from Massachusetts, who had joined the Army to fight for education and equality, expert in codes and mathematics, could operate telegraph equipment under combat conditions, could intercept and decode Confederate communications, but the communications he was intercepting weren't in the dialects of Confederate states, were in Northern accents, were using Union military codes, were discussing Union activities at what was supposed to be a Confederate manufacturing facility. Morrison signaled for his team to observe the complex from concealed positions. 10-year regular Army veteran who had fought in the Mexican War and against Plains Indians, had seen combat from Mexico City to Kansas Territory, understood that war required difficult decisions and moral compromises, but also understood that some activities crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, that some orders required questioning, even when questioning orders could be considered mutiny, that some missions revealed truths that were more dangerous than Confederate action. The manufacturing complex contained buildings that didn't match any known Confederate or captured Union architecture, didn't match Southern industrial designs that military intelligence had documented, matched Northern factory construction patterns, matched weapons manufacturing facilities, matched armaments production installations that were identical to facilities that Northern companies operated in states like Connecticut and Pennsylvania, matched the kind of facilities that Union contractors built to fulfill military production contracts. Through field glasses, the soldiers could see workers moving between buildings wearing Northern work clothes and using Northern manufacturing techniques, could see railroad cars arriving with raw materials that bore Northern corporate markings, could see finished ammunition being loaded onto wagons that were designed for Union military transport, could see communications equipment that was identical to systems used by Union quartermasters and ordnance officers, could see evidence that proved this facility was Union, not Confederate. Anderson intercepted telegraph communications that confirmed their worst suspicions, conversations in Northern accents between personnel who were discussing production quotas, delivery schedules, and profit calculations, not military communications about combat support, commercial communications about weapons manufacturing, about business operations that were producing defective ammunition for Union forces while simultaneously manufacturing superior ordnance for Confederate buyers, about activities that violated every principle of Union war aims while generating substantial profits for Northern investors. O'Brien discovered that the ammunition being produced contained gunpowder charges that were deliberately reduced below military specifications, cartridges that would misfire during combat, artillery shells that would explode prematurely or fail to detonate entirely, percussion caps that would fail when Union soldiers needed them most, manufacturing defects that weren't accidents or quality control failures, were systematic sabotage designed to increase Union casualties while maintaining plausible deniability for Northern manufacturers who were profiting from both sides of the war. Davis used his demolitions knowledge to examine the facility's production methods and saw something that changed everything: manufacturing equipment that was identical to machinery used in Northern armories, production techniques that were standard in Union weapons factories, quality control procedures that were being deliberately subverted to produce defective ammunition for Union forces while maintaining high standards for ordnance destined for Confederate buyers. Evidence that proved Northern manufacturers were sabotaging Union military effectiveness while claiming to support the Union cause. Murphy realized that the Union soldiers they were supposed to be protecting were being killed by weapons produced in Northern factories, by Northern workers, under contracts with Northern companies that were being paid by the Union government. Ammunition that was designed to fail when Union lives depended on its reliability. Medical supplies that were contaminated or diluted to reduce effectiveness. Equipment that was manufactured to break under combat stress. Systematic sabotage that was generating profits while killing Union soldiers. Johnson examined the transportation documentation and recognized shipping procedures that were identical to systems used by Northern railroad companies and express services. Logistics that were designed for supplying both Union and Confederate forces from the same manufacturing facilities. Transportation networks that were moving superior weapons to Confederate armies while delivering defective ordnance to Union forces. Commercial operations that were prolonging the war to maximize profits from both governments. The soldiers realized they weren't investigating Confederate supply operations. They were witnessing Northern commercial activities that were using the Civil War as an opportunity to generate profits by sabotaging Union military effectiveness, while simultaneously supplying Confederate forces with superior weapons. Activities that were extending the war, increasing casualties, and serving corporate interests rather than Union war aims. At 0847 hours. Facility security personnel discovered the Union observation positions. Security personnel who weren't Confederate soldiers or Southern militia were Northern private guards employed by Northern manufacturing companies who had orders to eliminate anyone who approached the facility without proper authorization, who had been told that any military personnel in the area were Confederate infiltrators who needed to be neutralized, who had been given permission to use lethal force against Union soldiers to protect Northern commercial activities that couldn't be acknowledged without destroying Northern credibility. The firefight began with rifle fire from positions that had been prepared specifically to eliminate military reconnaissance. Spencer repeating rifles, operated by personnel who had been trained to counter Union military tactics. Personnel who knew exactly how Union infantry operated and exactly how to neutralize their capabilities. Personnel who were killing Union soldiers to protect Northern business interests that were generating Northern profits while sabotaging Northern military effectiveness. Morrison ordered his team to take cover while returning fire with Springfield rifles that jammed after the third shot. Rifles that had been manufactured in the same facility they were observing. Rifles that had been deliberately sabotaged to fail during combat, fighting Northern guards who were using superior weapons to eliminate Union soldiers who had discovered Northern activities that were officially denied. Anderson used his knowledge of German military tactics to outflank security positions that had been designed to counter Confederate forces, not Union infantry who understood European warfare techniques. Eliminated several guards who were carrying identification that proved they were Northern citizens employed by Northern manufacturing companies that held Union government contracts for producing military supplies. O'Brien used his marksmanship training to eliminate facility personnel who were attempting to signal for reinforcements that would overwhelm the reconnaissance team. Personnel who were using Northern telegraph systems to contact Northern military contractors who would respond with additional guards and possibly regular Union forces, who would be told they were eliminating Confederate infiltrators rather than Union soldiers who had discovered Union activities that violated Union principles. Davis used his explosives expertise to destroy manufacturing equipment that was being used to produce defective ammunition for Union forces, not to eliminate Confederate military capabilities, but to prevent Northern sabotage of Northern military effectiveness. Explosions that eliminated production machinery, destroyed quality control records, and killed witnesses who could have testified about activities that were funded by Union taxpayers, but served commercial interests rather than Union military objectives. Murphy used his medical knowledge to treat wounded Union soldiers while using his access to sabotage manufacturing processes that were designed to produce contaminated medical supplies for Union forces. Sabotage that prevented Northern companies from completing production contracts that would have been profitable, but would have killed Union soldiers through deliberate medical malpractice disguised as wartime manufacturing difficulties. Johnson used his communication expertise to intercept and disrupt facility telegraph traffic that was attempting to coordinate the elimination of Union soldiers who had become inconvenient witnesses to Northern activities. Communications that proved Northern corporate executives knew about the sabotage operation, approved of the manufacturing practices, and authorized the elimination of Union military personnel who discovered what was being conducted in the Union's name. The soldiers extracted evidence of Northern weapons sabotage while fighting their way out of the facility against Northern security guards who had superior weapons and better defensive positions. Evidence that proved Northern manufacturers were sabotaging Union military effectiveness while simultaneously supplying Confederate forces with superior ordnance. Evidence that documented the use of Union military contracts to fund activities that served Confederate interests rather than Union interests. But extraction required crossing territory that was controlled by Union forces who had been told they were searching for Confederate infiltrators. Forces that had orders to eliminate the reconnaissance team to prevent exposure of activities that could embarrass Union leadership and destroy Northern public support for the war. Forces that were willing to kill Union soldiers to protect Northern business executives who had never risked their lives for anything except profit margins. The pursuit began when Union artillery began shelling coordinates that were transmitted by facility personnel who survived the infantry assault. Artillery bombardment that was officially attributed to counter-battery fire against Confederate positions, but was actually designed to eliminate Union personnel who possessed evidence of Union crimes. Bombardment conducted by Union artillery officers who believed they were supporting Union infantry operations, but were actually participating in the elimination of Union witnesses to Northern activities. Morrison led his team through battlefield terrain that had been mapped by Union engineers who provided the information to Union forces that were pursuing Union soldiers. Maps that showed every possible escape route, every potential hiding place, every source of water and cover. Maps that gave pursuing forces decisive advantages against infantry who were trying to reach friendly lines while carrying evidence that could expose Northern corporate crimes. Anderson used his language skills to communicate with German immigrants who were serving in other Union regiments, convincing them that Union soldiers were carrying information that could expose Northern activities that violated the principles they had enlisted to defend. Information that German-American troops could use to embarrass Union leadership that was betraying the democratic principles that had attracted European immigrants to fight for the Union cause. O'Brien maintained communication with regimental headquarters, providing false information about their location and status to prevent Union forces from intercepting evidence of Northern weapons sabotage. Communication that required deceiving Union commanders who were participating in the elimination operation without understanding what they were eliminating. Communication that served Union interests by opposing Union officials who were betraying Union values. Davis used his demolition skills to create obstacles that delayed Union forces pursuing the reconnaissance team. Obstacles that served Union military interests by opposing Union commercial interests. obstacles that protected Union soldiers from Union forces who had been ordered to kill Union soldiers to protect Union officials who were profiting from activities that were killing Union soldiers. Murphy used his medical expertise to treat civilian casualties who were wounded in crossfire between Union soldiers and Union forces pursuing them. Treatment that served humanitarian principles while complicating military operations. Treatment that preserved witnesses to Northern activities while endangering Union personnel who were trying to expose those activities. Johnson used his telegraph expertise to intercept Union communications about the pursuit operation. Learning that Union forces had been told they were chasing Confederate agents who possessed classified information about Union military capabilities. Forces that didn't know they were pursuing Union soldiers. Forces that had been lied to by Union officials who were using Union military personnel to eliminate Union evidence of Northern crimes. The chase continued for 3 days across battlefield terrain that was being contested between Union and Confederate armies who were fighting the Battle of Gettysburg. Terrain where Union soldiers were being pursued by Union forces while Confederate armies were advancing toward Union positions. Battlefield where the evidence they carried could change the outcome of the war by exposing the Northern sabotage that was prolonging the conflict for commercial profit. Evidence carried by the soldiers proved that Northern manufacturers were systematically sabotaging the Union military effectiveness, while simultaneously supplying Confederate forces with superior weapons and equipment. Sabotage that was generating substantial profits by selling weapons to both sides while ensuring that Union forces received defective ordnance that would fail during combat. Sabotage that was prolonging the war, increasing casualties, and serving commercial interests rather than Union military objectives. The sabotage operation was part of a larger network that supplied weapons to both Union and Confederate forces, while ensuring that neither side could achieve decisive victory. Commercial interests that profited from prolonged conflict rather than from Union or Confederate success. Manufacturing companies that were owned by Northern investors who were generating profits from both governments while ensuring that the war would continue long enough to maximize their returns on investment. But the evidence also revealed that Northern officials planned to expand the sabotage operations to include systematic elimination of Union military leaders who were too effective at fighting Confederate forces. Leaders whose success threatened to end the war too quickly for commercial interests that required prolonged conflict to maximize profits. Union officers who were being targeted for elimination by Northern agents who were disguising assassinations as Confederate military action. The soldiers reached Confederate lines on July 5, 1863, after evading Union forces for 3 days, while protecting evidence that documented systematic Northern sabotage of Union military effectiveness, evidence that was immediately classified by Confederate authorities, who understood that exposing Northern activities would validate Confederate claims about Union government corruption, while potentially ending the profitable weapons trade that was supplying Confederate forces with superior Northern ordnance. The reconnaissance team was officially declared killed in action, presumed eliminated by Confederate forces, while conducting operations behind enemy lines during the Battle of Gettysburg. Their families were told they had died heroically serving Union interests in the war's greatest battle. Their sacrifice was used to justify increased military spending and expanded weapons production contracts with the same Northern manufacturers who had been sabotaging Union military effectiveness. But they didn't die at Gettysburg. They lived as Confederate prisoners who possessed evidence that could embarrass Union leadership while potentially ending the war through exposure of Northern corruption. Prisoners who were protected by Confederate intelligence services that understood the value of evidence that could undermine Union public support for the war, while revealing the commercial interests that were prolonging the conflict for profit. The weapons sabotage operation continued using different personnel and different security measures. The commercial activities continued using different manufacturing facilities and different cover stories. The profit generation continued using different methods and different justifications. Northern crimes continued because Northern criminals were never prosecuted, because Northern evidence was classified by Northern officials, because Northern witnesses were eliminated by Northern forces. This story ends here, but the sabotage doesn't end. It continues in factories that produce weapons for both sides of every conflict, conducted by manufacturers who profit from prolonged wars rather than from decisive victories, funded by government contracts that serve commercial interests rather than military objectives, supervised by officials who serve corporate shareholders rather than national interests, justified by patriotism that actually serves profit margins. 7 soldiers learned that the greatest threat to Union victory comes from Union officials who profit from Union defeat, that the most effective way to destroy American principles is to claim you're defending them while systematically violating everything they represent, that the only way to serve the Union is to oppose Union officials who have captured Union institutions and use them to serve interests that are fundamentally hostile to Union principles. The Civil War became a business model for activities that had nothing to do with preserving the Union or ending slavery. Operations that were designed to generate profits for Northern corporations rather than to achieve Union military objectives. Operations that prolonged the war and increased casualties because ending the conflict would end the commercial opportunities that made the war valuable to people who viewed national tragedy as business opportunity. The evidence preserved by 7 soldiers documented Northern activities that continued throughout the war and influenced its duration and outcome. Activities that were expanded as military spending increased. Activities that were refined through technological advances. Activities that were legitimized through legal frameworks that made war profiteering legal when conducted by Northern companies against Southern competitors. Activities that were eventually used in subsequent American wars, where similar patterns of weapons sabotage and commercial exploitation prolonged conflicts for profit. Some truths are too profitable for Americans to acknowledge, too expensive for Northern officials to admit, too revealing for Union institutions to declassify, too honest for American systems that depend on war for revenue generation. This is one of them. The truth that Union soldiers died not to preserve the Union from Confederate rebellion, but to protect Union officials from Union activities that were more destructive to Union principles than any Confederate threat. The war continues in factories that serve American corporations rather than American soldiers, fought by contractors who profit from conflict rather than seeking victory, funded by American taxpayers who don't know their money, serves commercial interests rather than military objectives, supervised by American officials who serve American corporations rather than American principles, justified by American patriotism that actually serves American profit margins rather than American values. This story is classified, will remain classified, will be denied if discovered, will be attributed to Confederate propaganda if published, will be used to justify expanded military spending if investigated, because acknowledging the truth would require admitting that American military effectiveness has been sabotaged by American manufacturers who profit from American military failure, that American weapons serve American commercial objectives rather than American military objectives. The Pennsylvania countryside keeps its secrets. The evidence remains hidden in archives controlled by Confederate intelligence services that became Southern historical societies. The truth survives in fragments, protected by people who could never return to Union territory without signing their own death warrants. Justice waits for authorities who will never be granted authority to deliver it. Accountability depends on systems designed to prevent accountability. 7 soldiers learned that serving Union victory requires discovering that Union victory agencies serve Union corporations rather than Union victory. That Union freedom costs more than Union citizens can afford, because the price is paid in Union blood, spilled by Union weapons that are designed to fail. That Union principles require eliminating Union officials who profit from Union failure. That the only way to protect the Union is to protect it from Union officials who are running it as a business rather than as a republic. The manufacturing facility was destroyed. The evidence was buried. The witnesses were eliminated, but the system that created the facility, buried the evidence, and eliminated the witnesses continues to operate, continues to use American resources to conduct activities that serve American corporate interests rather than American military interests, continues to sacrifice American soldiers to protect American activities that violate American principles, continues to betray American values while claiming to defend them. The Civil War became the template for activities that had nothing to do with Union victory or Confederate defeat, war that was prolonged to create commercial opportunities for Northern manufacturers who sold weapons to both sides, while ensuring that neither side received effective ordnance, victory that was delayed to maximize profits from military contracts that served commercial interests rather than military objectives. Peace that was postponed because ending the war would end the business opportunities that made the war valuable to people who had never carried weapons or faced enemy fire. And somewhere, in the archives of Southern historical societies, evidence continues to exist that could expose the Northern conspiracy that prolonged America's bloodiest war for commercial profit. Evidence that proves the Civil War was extended by Northern manufacturers who sabotaged Union military effectiveness while supplying Confederate forces with superior weapons. Evidence that documents the conversion of American patriotism into American profit margins. Evidence that reveals the transformation of American military conflict into American commercial opportunity. Some wars are fought between nations with different principles. Others are fought between people with the same principles and people who view principles as marketing opportunities. The Civil War was both a conflict between Union and Confederate political systems and a conflict between Americans who believed in their principles and Americans who viewed those principles as products to be sold to the highest bidder, between Americans who were willing to die for American values and Americans who were willing to kill Americans who took American values seriously. The Battle of Gettysburg was won by Union forces who fought with sabotaged weapons against Confederate forces who were supplied with superior Northern ordnance. Victory that was achieved despite Northern manufacturers who were trying to ensure Confederate success. Success that was accomplished by Union soldiers who overcame Northern sabotage through courage and determination that Northern commercial interests had tried to undermine through systematic weapons failures. But victory at Gettysburg didn't end Northern sabotage of Union military effectiveness. It intensified it, because Union success threatened to end the war too quickly for Northern manufacturers who required prolonged conflict to maximize their profits from military contracts with both governments. Because Union victory would end the commercial opportunities that had made the Civil War the most profitable conflict in American history for American companies that viewed American suffering as American business opportunity. The war continued for 2 more years after Gettysburg, 2 years during which Northern manufacturers continued to sabotage Union military effectiveness while supplying Confederate forces with superior weapons. 2 years during which Union soldiers continued to die from weapons failures that were manufactured in Northern factories by Northern workers under contracts with Northern companies that were paid by the Union government to produce effective ordnance for Union forces. This story ends here, but the pattern doesn't end. It continues in every American war, where American manufacturers sabotage American military effectiveness to prolong conflicts that generate profits for American corporations, where American soldiers die from American weapons that are designed to fail, when American lives depend on their reliability, where American principles are betrayed by Americans who claim to defend them, while systematically destroying everything they represent for commercial gain.